As a result of a few recent events, I think it's useful to make this video, and I'm going to go ahead and put it at the head of the queue. As many of you know, I have material produced to release every other day for the next several months. But this is relevant and important, and I'm going to publish it now so that hopefully it can be put into place sooner rather than later. And I hope that this reaches basically everyone who watches these videos. We're going to talk about people who create content, but we're also going to talk about people who watch it or read it. And so that definitely includes you if you're watching this. So please stick around. I'm going to make this as brief as I can. And it's especially oriented to people that usually leave after they've started a video. So if that's you, hopefully that entices you to stay. It's just 2 slides. So let's start on learning. This is just a quick note. It's just a couple thoughts. I just want to make this as brief as I can and focus on the biggest parts of this that I could say. So the other day, I just so happened to go to the analytics page on the YouTube channel, which I hardly ever do. And I managed to click on the graph that shows the duration of views. And I was kind of surprised that it was an inverse Pareto distribution. It's a very sharp drop of a graph. Now, some of the videos are on the longer side, and some of them are on the shorter side. I think most of them are kind of long. But independent of the length of the video, the pattern was actually quite similar. Most people, an overwhelming percentage of people, so 50% or more, only stay around for maybe the first 5% of the video. And why this was shocking to me was for several reasons. First off, recently, I had several people who know me very well, and so that's a very small set of people, comment on how surprised they were at something I said to them. And obviously the circumstances were different across the different people, but this is something that happens to me all the time. People who know me well are surprised at something I say or do. And it's interesting because to me, the thing I said or did was not at all a deviation from my character. It was spot on. It's something I take very seriously. And so, and this could be a very long conversation, but just to keep it brief, one of the incorrect expectations that we have is that all people are as easy to pin down as we are. There's a less glamorous way of saying this. Different people have different depths of character. The model that they use to describe reality and their understanding of things, it can be much, much wider and deeper from person to person. And maybe it's more comfortable to think of this in terms of God. What do you think God's model of reality looks like? It's at least as complicated as the universe. So hopefully that does it for you, right? It's immense. And you have no inkling of that, right? As people become more like him, or the more like him a person is, the deeper they're going to be. And the more surprises they're going to have up their sleeve. And it's not because they're sitting around waiting to pull one on you. It's, again, switching to God. Why do you think it takes so long to know him? And this is what this fallacy uncovers, this misunderstanding that all people are equally shallow and predictable, which is the same. God cannot be known except by becoming like him. There's a reason for that. There's so much to know. Another way of putting this is God is unique, meaning nothing can describe him except himself. And you'll find many, many, many scriptures illustrating this. And of course, I don't have time to go through them right now. I'm trying to be brief. If you think, and say, well, Rob, you're not God. Correct. Yes, thank you. Yes, correct. Okay. But the funny thing about the drop-off is it's from people, it's not from new viewers. It's from subscribers. And so these are people who have seen videos and know that I am constantly dropping surprises in these videos, things you did not know and did not expect. And yet they'll watch the first, say, 5% of the video and say, oh, I can accurately predict the value of everything else he's going to say in this video. That's insane to me. It's absolutely insane. And not because it has anything to do with me, although obviously I've got a lot of firsthand knowledge about that. Do you have a similar attitude with God? Because I bet you do. I bet you think you know everything that's worth knowing. And you might get offended at that, but I'd bring up the fact that these are people who keep coming back. Why? So, I strongly encourage you to stick around. And if you have to just play it in the background while you're doing something else, that's not something I would do, but obviously I'm biased. I highly value these things. Or if you put it on 2x, I do listen to my own videos, and I do it at 2x. Now, I don't listen to them nonstop, obviously, but if I don't have anything else in my queue while I'm working out, for example, I'll pop on a video and see what it's all about, because usually I publish them months and months after I make them. Sometimes I'll listen to them before they get published again. Sometimes that results in me moving around when they're going to come out. Sometimes I listen to them after they're published, and I'm just shocked at what I've already said years ago that obviously people are still working on, and so on. So I guess that's enough on that. But this translates into, or transfers to, how the books are read too, which I know, although no one has told me. And once a guy, he bragged to me, because I said in a talk, I bragged. And you've heard of humble brag. I think this was a true brag. It was just a statement of the truth. I said, I don't think anyone's going to keep up with me as far as the speed at which I'm producing these materials. Mainly the books, but I'm going over a lot of other things and similar things in the videos. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Oh, I'll take your challenge." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I've read everything you've written." And I said, "Well, clearly you haven't understood it." There's so much in those books. And I don't know anyone who's even scratched the surface of what's there. That's not meant to be an insult. It's meant to be an invitation to take another look. And it's a really good idea to power through the book, maybe as fast as you can, to get an overview. An alternative approach is to read it very slowly the first time, because you want to preserve your beginner's eyes. The more often you get exposed to something, the less you'll pay attention to it. But regardless as to how you do your first pass, I highly encourage you to randomly, if nothing better, revisit sections of those books at least. And maybe that's a good way to tackle it, to not go cover to cover, but just jump in, maybe by a chapter, maybe by a section. The books are all written in sections. There's a reason for that. And in addition to that, to make use of the fantastic search. My son wrote that. I didn't write one line of code so far for the website, upwardthought.org. That's all volunteer from two of my sons, and I'm very grateful for that. There's no way I could have taken the time to do that without a severe slowdown in the writing. And so I'm very glad that that worked out the way it has. But there's a search on there, and it's extremely good. It's very good. We're always making it better. So if you have an inkling to study a certain topic, or you have a certain question, I highly encourage you to use that search. And that might trigger you to take a second look at a specific section of the book. You can include the books in your search, and it'll show you exactly where the quote came from, and you can go from there. Okay? These are powerful tools. There's a lot there. That's my point. That's my quick note on learning. Now let's go over to teaching. For years now, I've highly encouraged people to start to teach other people what they know about God and how to become more like Him, whether that's in writing or in video or in face-to-face form. Now, I have a lens on some of this because some of those people have made at least some of those videos public, and I know about at least some of them. Here are some very quick pointers on teaching. Now, before I begin this, I know that as I go through this, some of you are going to say, what a hypocrite. He doesn't do that. Well, I do some of these. But if I deviate from my advice, it's to provide something that's unique to my role. And there's a big difference between revealing things and teaching things that have already been revealed. So, the nature of my role is that I do both of those things. But for you, I highly recommend you follow the following advice, and there's a lot more where this came from. I actually have probably 800 pages worth of typed notes on teaching, specifically in the gospel context, and who knows when I'll be able to publish that. For now, what I've been focusing on is the instruction that will help you as an individual become more like Jesus. How you help others to do that, we're still early on that, but that doesn't mean that it's not very important. And so this is for the benefit of those of you who are already dipping your feet in that water. For every lesson you teach, every single thing that you record or write, you should ask yourself, as a result of this lesson, what do I want the people who view it or read it to change? If you can't make that list of changes, I would suggest you pause until you have it. Now, if your task is to write out what you understand the gospel to be, that's fine. That's a different sort of thing. But when it comes to actually teaching other people, you're not writing a dictionary or an encyclopedia of the gospel. You're trying to effect change. And so if you can't describe what that change is, then you probably shouldn't be teaching a lesson. You should also be able to indicate the reasons that they should make those changes. Now, here's a point that's important on at least two levels. When you're enumerating those reasons, don't succumb to the trap of listing your reasons for why you would change in those ways. Those don't necessarily matter to anyone else. This is super relevant to where we're going to get in a minute. If you came to those changes through the intervention of someone else, me or whoever else, maybe an angel from heaven, maybe God himself through his voice to you in your head, it doesn't matter what the source was. You have to understand that the reasons why you were able to receive that and that was sufficient for you to change are very unlikely to be the same for other people. In other words, if all you do is copy paste, your efficacy is going to be very low. The number of people you can reach is not going to be significantly different than the number of people whoever got to you can already get to. If you learned what you know through direct voice of God from heaven, you will not be teaching anyone who could receive the same because they've already received it. If what you've learned was direct from an angel from heaven, dropping out of the skies and drop kicking you in the face as he comes, you will not be teaching that to people who can receive the same because they already would have received it. If what you learned came from some random crazy dude on the internet who rambles, takes the train to Rambletown every video he makes, you never know what you're going to get. You should not be producing the same stuff because you will not reach anyone else. You should be able to ask the question, how is this different than how I received it? Or how is this different from what's already out there? If you're going to make a video about, I don't know, let's just pick something random, baptism, and it just so happens there's a perfect video out there that has all the same things you're going to say. You should not make that video. You should forward people to that video. And it's not just content, it's also style. There are all kinds of differences that could be present. You could have a better production quality. People like, what's that called? Stock video clips and good sound and sharp editing. If you're providing that, then that's a good difference. It could be the same ideas. Maybe they're expressed a lot more cleanly. But, very few people have time or skill to make better production videos, although you might be one of them. Maybe you can just make them shorter. Maybe you can dial into one specific idea out of 20 that are given in a 30-minute or 1-hour video, and you just dial into that and you make a 2-minute super crisp video. And when I say super crisp, I don't mean you have to take 5,000 shots and seam them together, stitch them together with all this post-production editing. You can just use the pause function on your phone as you're recording. And you could even have a script that you've written out 5 bullet points and you hit unpause and you talk about the very specific thing, you hit pause again. People are really accepting of jumpy clips. They're used to it by now. Doesn't bother them at all. You won't lose anybody with that. And if you make a short compared to, I think YouTube's limit is 5 minutes for a short. If you make a short compared to a video that's not a short, you will absolutely get at least 4 times as many views. Just right off the bat. And if it's much more likely to go viral or just to spread a little further. But right off the bat, you'll get 4 times more views. And so it's kind of surprising to me that there hasn't been someone who has stood up to say, you know what, I'm going to make shorts out of all these wonderful ideas that God has given me about the gospel. And I'm just going to crank them out once a week, make a short. The funny thing about that is it actually takes very, very little time. Okay, and of course you could be more focused. Even if you're making a long form video, you could say, well, this whole video is just going to be a quick note on teaching. And for 10 minutes, we're just going to bang through this and nothing else. Very focused. And so when you focus on the importance of things and you sort of diagram this as a hierarchy, it keeps you focused. It keeps you focused on the things you probably have the most business talking about. And if you meander off that path, again, there's a big difference between a teacher and a revelator. There's a big difference, and they're not the same. We need a lot more teachers. If other revelators pop up, that's great, but that's not what I'm seeing. We need a lot more teachers. And as you aim to hone your craft, you're going to be massively more effective in the number of people you reach and the changes that occur as a result of your teaching. And this comes to the last thing I want to talk about on this video, which is you should have specific ideas about things you are saying and things you're not saying, and ways you're saying them and ways you're not saying them, in order to tailor your message to the very specific audience you are targeting. This is another difference between a teacher and a revelator. I do not have a specific audience. My job is to say all the things that God teaches me. Now, sometimes I put on my teacher hat and I adopt a specific audience to make a specific point. I'm doing that right now. But in general, the videos I produce and the books that I write are more like encyclopedias. I'm telling you things that no one has ever known about these things as far as we know. I'm telling you things that you would never get out of the scriptures, even though they're right there in front of you, in a lifetime of study. And so on and so forth. But is that what you're doing in your videos or in the things that you write? That's the question. So, if you're tailoring your message, what you want to ask yourself is not, what do I know, and let me just talk all about it, but what do they know and what needs to change? What's the basis of their understanding? And then you know how to go into that and try to persuade them. What do they believe already? You can use that as a foundation to build on, if it's correct. And what do they do already? You can use that as a foundation so that the changes they make are incremental off of that. And what parts of those beliefs and actions need to change? And what would be sufficient to convince them to do it? What's the value that they see in what they already have and do? And what's the greater value that you're offering them? And how do you communicate that? And so I hope that you think about this and start working on it. And like I said, we're early on all of this, but it's always a good time to start teaching other people. I have to give a caveat to that. It's not a higher priority than your own repentance and your own alignment with God. That really has to be in place first. But if you're there, it's a wonderful time to start teaching, even if not a whole lot about how to do it well has been revealed. So I invite you to think about these things and apply them. And if you do, you're going to see a tremendous improvement in your reach and the effectiveness of what you teach.